So as we get started, there's actually, last week, one of the things we did was we talked more about the pandemic and the sort of the medical side of things, but I think what's interesting is with conversations, you can script them, but that went in directions that, I tried, right? Like I had this list of questions, like way too many. And we got to a lot of the ideas behind the questions that I didn't even get to ask, but the conversation just kind of flowed that way and really went in some directions that not bad directions, just it wasn't where I had planned for it to go. And so that's sort of how this is going to work again today. And one of the things that I want to talk about today is we're continuing to process the last year, right? That's what we're doing, and why we're doing this is to process the events that happened last year to help, because if you don't do that, then you're just going to rush past to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and then you won't learn the lessons by reflecting upon what happened and where you saw God move and where he came through in different ways. So I personally think that's really important, and for us as a church, spiritually, it's important to reflect. So this week, we are going to be talking about some things, this is maybe a trigger warning, that have been made very political. We're going to be talking about events like kind of around George Floyd and some of the racial stuff that happened last year, and what I will do is my disclaimer at the front. I think most of you know me fairly well, and I'm not really interested in political platforms and ideologies, okay? What I'm interested in is the kingdom of God. And so I think that's going to come through as we talk about this, and so just to set the stage for that, what I want you to consider are a couple of texts that come to us from the New Testament. So the first one comes from Galatians 3. This is the Apostle Paul, and many historians and scholars will say that this is the first egalitarian statement in all of human history. And that is something that I think we can hear and be like, oh, that's cool. It is the first egalitarian statement in human history. Listen to what Paul says here in Galatians 3. He says, "So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." And of course, he's not saying that those things don't exist, but it's just in Jesus, those are not what define us. Jesus does, right? And then this other picture comes to us from Revelation 7, and if Paul's there talking very practically to a church in Galatians 3, and what we hear then in Revelation 7 is this vision the Apostle John has of what God is doing and what he's going to be doing in the world. It's also a message specifically for the church in a specific time, a specific place, but it has profound implications for how we live in the kingdom today. And so this is what John writes in Revelation 7. At the very beginning of this chapter, he is talking about how there will be 12,000 from all of the 12 tribes of Israel who are sealed for God's kingdom. And some traditions, like Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, take that number to be a quite literal number, as though if we get to 143,999, then people are going to be like, where's Jacob? Somebody find him. We're not here. Which is come on, right? If that's not a symbolic picture of the fullness of God's people and his covenant people being brought in, then I don't know what is. But so after that is when John gives this wonderful picture, which is one of the reasons why you can't take that number, 144,000, as a specific number, and you must understand it as something much broader. And I'll explain in a second. This is what John says. He says, "After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count." Context is so important, right? A great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Just a quick pause there. As you think about this picture that he's seeing, go back to Abraham, the father of Israel, right? And this great patriarch of the Jewish faith. And you go all the way back to Abraham and the promise that God gives to Abraham. He says, "Abraham, look in the sky. Count the stars." He says, "You can't do it. There's too many." He says, "So will your children be, and your grandchildren after you." The children, as Paul says, who are by faith. Not by blood, not by lineage, not by creed, but by faith. A great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." And the last biblical commentary note that I'll make is that salvation belongs to our God. It does not belong to you. It's his gift that he gives, and you receive it gratefully. And it belongs to the Lamb, who purchased it with his own blood at great cost to himself. And so it's just a reminder, right, for all of us. I mean, I think that for me is really powerful. It's not up to me to decide who's in and who's out. It's his job. And thank God it is, because I don't think I do a very good job. I don't have the wisdom and the perspective and near anything else. But that it also brings this picture home that it's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus. Not just this kind of mythical idea of like, you just be a good person. No. It's all about Jesus. Always has been. And it always will be. And so, Robert, with that introduction, we'll get into things today. Part of the reason I think this is important for us is because Robert and I, and Alex too, have had a lot of these conversations over the last couple years, really. And I don't know if you know this or not, but Robert and I, we are not related. Our skin is a little different. I mean, I've been told he's a little darker than me. That's just what I've been told. I don't know. I'd say we're pretty close.
A little close.
Yeah, I've been tanning a lot. I think it's really working. That was a bad joke.
Depends on the time of the year.
Yeah, right? It depends on the time. Like high summer, whoo, man. But like December, like forget it. I'm like very pale.
There you go.
Yeah, something like that. So I guess, as we kind of want to think about this and process it, I mean, so I guess we'll just start here. So Robert, kind of from your perspective, what happened last year?
Well, it's interesting. And what happened last year was really a culmination of a lot of things. And it really was expressed as if it was something new. And the reality is that it's nothing really that's new. It was expressed as if it was something that had just come about in the past 5 or 10 years. It's not. In the past 40 or 50 years, it's not. What has happened in the past year or so, dealing with things such as racism and dividing people and things of that nature, honestly has been going on since the beginning of time. If you look back through the Bible, it has happened for a long, long time. If you choose not to look through the Bible and just want to look through history books, it has happened for a long time. And people are separated by whatever they choose to separate each other by. As human beings, we are very tribal people, so we're going to find something that binds us together and separates somebody away. So that is, in a nutshell, kind of what has taken place. Now, to kind of narrow it down here, it's interesting because if you were to believe what you're hearing and what you see through the media and through TV and things of that nature, you would think that America as a country is just burning and just going to pot and everything is just horrible and bad and nobody likes each other, nobody gets along or anything of that nature. And it's interesting because as soon as you hear that, you see that, you read that, and then you get into your vehicle and you go to the grocery store, and you go to work, and you go to school, and everything like that. And guess what? Everybody is living together. Everybody's working together. Everybody is helping each other. Everybody's doing all those things that we did yesterday, and we're doing it today, and we're doing it tomorrow. And so one of the interesting things about it is that we have to realize exactly what are we talking about when we discuss what is a true dividing line of people. What is it that we're truly talking about? And to be honest about that conversation. One of the things that I'm trying my best to not do is that I don't want to make a disclaimer. I don't want to qualify anything that I say or believe or think or anything of that nature, because that's really the crux of it. And I think that is something that as Christians we have to offer people, because you have to be able to sit down in front of somebody that might not look like you, might not sound like you, might not believe the things that you believe, and have a conversation with that person and love them. And that is a true test of what we believe. Can you listen to that person? Can you acknowledge that person? Can you love that person and their beliefs, even if you don't agree with it, even if it falls counter to what you personally think that you believe in that is so important, and still move on from that point during the day? And I can tell you that, as another marketing thing, small groups helps a lot for that, because it is really interesting how, as I've gone through all the different small groups that I've been part of, right now I find myself being not only in a small group that I am just like the oldest person in the room. But it's
by a little bit, really.
Yeah, but it's interesting because the generational concepts are very different. And one of the important things about having a conversation with people of different colors and sex and gender and blah, 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 is that you have to be able to listen. You got to stop trying to speak, and you got to listen to what they're saying and understand what it is that they're trying to say and what they believe. You don't necessarily have to just jump out and believe it or not, but you got to listen. And if you listen to people, people will acknowledge the fact that everybody's going to walk away from that. I would be very disappointed in somebody if they came to me, expressed something, I said something different, they just said, oh, you're right, I was wrong for years. You have now changed my mind, I'm going to leave. No, you're not going to change anybody's mind just like that. But over time, then change can happen. But you have to have that conversation. And that conversation sometimes is painful. It is uncomfortable. It hurts. Sometimes you're going to say things that is going to hurt that person in front of you. Sometimes that person will say something that's going to hurt you. And you got to get past it. And that's what's really important. And I think that is what's happened in the past year. We've reached a point right now where we are saying things and we're doing things and we're hearing things that is hurting each other. And we're not really sure. I mean, I didn't hurt anybody. Did you hurt anybody? You didn't hurt anybody. Well, who's hurting anybody? It seems like we're all hurting each other. And we don't know. And that's where we have to pump the brakes, stop, let's think about this and say, wait a minute. I don't really feel that way, or maybe there is something here, or maybe I do need to rethink about something. But we're not going to get there until we make those hard conversations actually take place.
Yeah, I think that's that's a great point, because it's, we're missing this idea that Paul talks about, like learning how to speak the truth in love. And I think so often we get so concerned about trying to be right, whatever that might be or whatever that might mean, or whatever we think is right, whether or not it's actually right. We want to be right. And so our primary concern is being right, when what the invitation for all of us is to be a people of love, not a people of being right. And it's not that truth is unimportant, but someone can say something profoundly true in such a way that it comes across completely wrong. And so in whatever situation, that's just kind of like good general wisdom, I think, right? Like how you say something sometimes matters more than what you actually say. And I think many of us who have seen or been around churches who will say the right things, but the way that they say it is not the right thing, and it feels wrong. And then the real danger of that is that then what people will do who maybe don't have a rooting or a grounding in the truth, because the way that you said something was so hurtful or so wrong, they will then take that true statement and equate that with falsehood. And say, so for example, you say, God loves you, but you're a dirty, you're a piece of, you go through all the things, like some people do. Because on the one hand, you share a meme on Facebook about how God loves everybody, and then you say, on the other hand, something just incredibly that you shared from, some far left or far right news source, and you think you got them. I'm going to show those people that are different from me. Get them, right? And what happens then, right, is that you're talking. It's like James talks about, fresh water and salt water coming out of the same spring. It's not possible. That eventually people are going to identify that one or the other. So you just have to be very careful about that, I think. I think that's really good too. It's something that I want to touch on a little more, is that you talk about when people go, about their life, work, school, grocery store, all that stuff. They don't, for me anyway, right? We don't experience the division and the hardship at the levels that it's portrayed in the media. It doesn't mean that it's not there and that there's not tensions there, but just at the level, right, of animosity, pure hatred that I think is portrayed sometimes in the media or on social media or whatever. We just don't see it in the course of our daily interactions. And so, partly I'd like you to talk about that, maybe some of your own experience in that, because, as a doctor and as a black man, and all of that kind of comes together, and I think people probably treat you differently then they would say that they, or think about you differently than they maybe say they would think. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? Like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you go through life, what we call racism, what we call these concepts of, one people is subjugating another person because of something that really doesn't hold credence, be it the color of their skin or whatever. Does that exist? It's existed since the beginning of time. How does that exist? It exists in a lot of ways. Where does it exist? It exists honestly in everybody, because as human people, we all fail. Therefore, anyone who says, I don't have a racist, prejudiced, discriminatory bone in my body, I don't know, believe me. I think that if we really delve deep into it, we probably would find one. And maybe it just hadn't propped its head up, or maybe it has not been something that has really affected you in your life, but it probably does exist. And then you kind of get into the whole issue of, is it right, is it wrong, is it good, or is it bad? Should I react every time that you hear it? And that kind of requires people to have a thick skin, a sense of love, to realize that there are some things that you're going to let go. There are going to be some things that you're going to protest or fight back at. And then you have to figure out what is the right way in order to go about doing that. I used to tell my wife all the time, there was a time that I used to run a lot more than what I'm running now. And I would run over Warrior's Path, all the time. And it was interesting because I regularly went there every week for a long time. And I can tell you that there wasn't a month that went by that I would not run there and I would be called the N-word. Not a month would go by. And I'm talking about within the past year or two. And you would tell that to people, nah, not you. Maybe somebody else they said that to, but not you. No, yeah. And was it meant in a derogatory sense? I'm not really sure how else it could be meant. Was it
Sorry, I mean, that just, think about that for a second, right? The fact that you would even have to say that is insane, right? But that's the society and the way that some people have talked about this and thought about it. So, sorry, go on.
Now, as you look at that, you realize now there's a number of different ways that you can go about managing that. Now, at each and every time, I could probably rear back and fight and get mad and everything, but the reality is that that problem is not going to solve the problem in that issue, in that instance. The old sticks and stones, blah, 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 kind of comes into your mind and everything, and that's true also. Probably the best thing that ever happened to me in that regard was the pandemic, because guess what? The pandemic came, I didn't go run because nobody could go do anything, so I didn't have to worry about that. So that is a little bit interesting in that regard. However, let's flip back a little bit to how I was raised. And when I was raised, I would be there with my parents and my grandparents and everything. We tell the stories of our family and things of that nature. And my grandmother could trace from when her family came off of a plantation, and they were in a house that was right off of the plantation in Virginia. I owned the house that they actually vacationed at, as people just came off the plantation for years until I sold it, got rid of it because I would never move there. But it's interesting when you listen to the rhetoric and you listen to the talk and the conversation, everything was based on education. So if you told me somebody's name, they told me their name, they told me every degree that they got, every school and college that they went to, because that's how I was raised. Because there was just that much importance that was placed on education, so you can get up and you can rise above and you can be successful in everything. That's what the black culture was about during the 20th century, was education, improving yourself and doing better. But honestly, there was also a time when, it was just beat into my head. You've got to work 10 times harder than a white person so you can get ahead in life and everything. And that was supposed to be motivational speech for me. And did it motivate me during that time? Oh, yeah, my folks also said that I was the laziest person they could ever see and everything. I hope that was a motivational speech.
Parents,
Yeah. But the reality, though, is that they loved me, they were motivating me, I became successful in my own right. But were those racist comments that they were saying as a family to me? Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it was. And so you kind of have to acknowledge that, because does anybody hold a war to say I am the all racist tribe and nobody else is? No, everybody is. And once you kind of acknowledge that as such and kind of get over it, then we'll all be fine. That is what I think Christianity is about, to realize what are human constructs, man-made earth things like racism and gender identity and things of that nature. That's all stuff that we're thinking about that we kind of quibble over and everything like that. And then there are things that really matter that God has placed us here for to be concerned about, which is loving and helping one another. I'm not really too concerned about all the other stuff and everything like that. I'm not really too concerned about the color of your skin or what language you speak or anything of that nature. Not really concerned about the politics and the governing body of your country or things like that, because it says, when in Rome, do as the Romans. If the law says do that, then do that. I mean, God says, I don't have any big deal about that because I am the ruler of all. These are just human things that you're doing. So just follow it and do it and live and love each other as you should. So I think that as you move forward, you kind of take all those things, you realize that there's more to this whole racist conversation and things of that nature than what the media wants you to think. And everyone doesn't have to feel guilty and hurt and things of that nature about having the conversation, because that's the main problem. People are so guilt-ridden. Oh my gosh, I'm black and I've been downtrodden all my life. Well, let's think about that. Right now in this current generation of African-American culture, you probably haven't been downtrodden that much, because the slavery, the racism, the Jim Crow laws and things like that have existed and did create a mindset existed a long time ago. You really have to be taught that. You didn't experience a lot of that. You have to be taught that and told that took place. By the same token, you'll have a lot of whites and others say, well, I'm not racist, I've got a black friend.
It's Robert.
And that's fine, but you say that, but then how about the Asians? And then how about the Middle Easterners? How about that person who is Muslim and you hate their guts because they're Muslim, because you look back on what's happened and you don't realize that all of Islam is not necessarily horrible, hateful people. They're human beings. And all of them are children of God. And that is a hard concept really to try and wrap your arms around, is that everybody, all of them are children of God. And once you do that, then you can have those conversations, you can kind of experience things and move forward with it. Once you kind of move forward, and I'm here in private practice and everything, and it's the thing that happens that everyone would believe that, oh, you're going to be here and you're going to be great for the black community. You're going to just have all these people going to come to you and things like that. And the reality is that, no. For the longest time, and she laughs about it, because the black culture, the black community, they don't preferentially come to see me. If I were going to make a living on taking care of black people only, A, that'd be wrong. B, I'd go hungry. It just doesn't exist that way. And again, that's part of that whole, not so much racist, but it's that whole misguided concept that you think that just based on the color of your skin, that's the only way you can reach and get help. It was the same thing through the tenure, the terms of Obama. Everybody said, okay, you have a black president, we're going to solve racism with this black president. No, you're not, because he's president of everybody. He ain't president of just black people. So he's not going to be the one who's going to solve things. And here we are at this point in time. The reality is that he didn't solve things. Things theoretically are worse. And we still have to have some of those hard conversations and things of that nature to kind of move forward. And like I said, they hurt and they're painful. And based on where you are in your life, if you're in your teens or 20s, it means one thing to you. If you're in your 70s or 80s, it means something else to you. When I was in medical school here, I had to do a research. I had a job with family practice. I had to go into some areas, and it's funny because that was before cell phones. So I had to hop in my car and drive into some places like in Southwest Virginia to go ask people how they go about getting health care. So it was interesting. I would drive my car, park it, have to go up this hill and back down into some holler, as they call it. And and imagine it. You're this lone black kid walking down here
from Nashville.
Yeah, from Nashville. I'm not even from here. Asking these people who live way back in yonder, hey, I'm here to ask you how you go about getting health care.
Them banjos be strong back there.
And how y'all doing? But the reality is that healthcare, just like feeding people and just like loving people and everything of that nature, it knows no color. Nobody's going to hurt you or harm you. if they're good Christian people. Now, does it say no bad is ever going to happen? No, because we live with human people. So sometimes things happen. But I'm just as nervous about walking in those hollers as I am. I also went to Harlem back when I was in medical school. And I got out my car and I literally saw somebody getting hit with a 2x4. And that probably scared me about just as much. I was like,
that'll do it.
That has to hurt. So you really have to kind of address where these things go in your life and realize that you're not defined by the color of your skin. You're not defined by the language that you speak. You're not defined by the education or the degrees that you have or anything. You're defined by how you interact with the people right around you.
Law passed, the right bill, put through. And I mean, when you take a step back and you look at the perspective, right? What is it that people, specifically, I think this is maybe a bit of a philosophical point that I'm making, but it's what is the nature of politics and what are politics inherently trying to do? I mean, if you go back to the words, right, it's this idea of the polis, it's a Greek city-state. So politics is learning how to live together in that kind of place as a people. So when you look at modern world, how we try to do things through politics, is the idea that both parties, or whatever parties, if you live in Great Britain or in some other part of the world where they have a multi-party system, it's the idea that they're going to build a society that is filled with righteousness and joy and peace and love and prosperity, right? What are they trying to build? They're trying to build the kingdom. But there is a very real problem, is that you cannot build the kingdom without the king. It will not ever happen. There are good things that can happen through laws. There are many great followers of Jesus who have been on all sides of all aisles throughout human history. But the point is that you will never build the kingdom without the king. It cannot happen because it belongs to him. Salvation belongs to our God. It does not belong to our systems or to our ideologies or to our platforms or to our religions. It belongs to our God and to the Lamb who sits on the throne. And that's just a really important point. And so I didn't want to pass that by without saying that. Place, thank you for bringing me back around. I do that a lot, so it's good. So place, and I think that's important, right? Because I grew up here in Kingsport, and I think for those, most of you have been here a long time, longer than I have, and you'll recognize that Kingsport, or the Tri-Cities, is not the most diverse region in the United States. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It just is a thing. It's reality. And so, you grew up in Nashville. And so I'm just curious. You talked a little bit about it just in that last response, but what differences do you see between living in a place like Nashville, which, was pretty multicultural probably when you grew up, is way more so now, versus, like Nashville versus like a Tri-Cities versus a Harlem? What kind of differences do you see?
The areas that you live in reflect the people that are there. So for Nashville, for me, and I'll say I grew up in Nashville. That was where I was last before I graduated and moved out and thought that I was an adult and decided to make my way on my own. But I'm a military brat. My dad was in the Army. It's one regrets that I have, honestly. Truthfully, is that I wish that I had actually taken the time to serve. It just means something to me. It meant something to him. It meant something to my uncles and everybody else who served. It just is that important to me. But because of that, I moved every 4 years because he'd get orders. Guess what? You work now in Fort Solver and blah blah blah. So I remember that Lord and Lady Baltimore luggage because I didn't even unpack that thing because why? We're about to pack it up. When my brother died, and I finally cleaned out the house that I grew up in Nashville, there were still boxes where we had moved from like the late 60s, early 70s, Allied Van Line stickers still on them. There were telephone books from when we used to live in El Paso. That was where my mom was from, Dad was stationed there. There were telephone books there from back in the 60s that we still carry. But what happens when you move around a lot like that is that you realize what diversity is and what's important about living around people is you realize that you have to lean on each other a little bit more. When you live in an area that is multicultural, then you should take the time to understand what makes everyone different. And I say should. Not everybody always does that. And everybody always wants to fight for control. That's the human side of it. Growing up in high school and junior high, I didn't recall ever being at a school that was not what I thought was predominantly black, because it was the black students who always seemed to have the roles on the team, sports and athletic teams, and always had the roles in the student governments and things like that. When you look back at the yearbook and everything, I realized that, no, actually they were majority white and everything. You just didn't know anything about it. And it kind of moves forward from there. So that lifestyle was very different. It was a friend of mine who lived around the corner, and she was Catholic. I had no clue what that meant. Honestly, I had no clue what that meant for a long time. When I was in residency, I had residents who came to fill spots there from Beirut, Lebanon. And I call them real Muslims because when I grew up, it was the Nation of Islam, which were the American Muslims. And that ain't real Islam, man. That's American Islam. So it's a huge difference. That was my first exposure to somebody who was fasting for a period of time because of something that they believed in, which I thought, and I was in a program now that had somebody who was Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, and Christians. Figuring out, one thing that I had to learn about, and I'm so glad that I read, there was a book back in the 70s about different religions and all. And I read that so I could understand it, at least the basic tenets of different religions, because imagine trying to work out a work schedule and everybody has different holidays and based on their religions. And so I realized that the Jewish believers didn't mind working on Christmas, but the Muslim believers, they could work over here. And if you got everybody working together in that regard, everybody's happy. So again, it kind of requires getting to know things, getting to know people. So fast forward when you come to this area. Is a funny story. My dad, because that was the first time I ever moved out of home, and I had this little two-seater sports car, and I had all my worldly possessions in that two-seater sports car, and still room. And I drove here, and Dad said, you're making your way, you're moving out, be strong, keep your head on right, do the right thing, blah, blah, blah. And again, he gave me advice. He said, when you get there to school, you go to the cafeteria. You go look in the cafeteria. He says, I'm telling you, I've never seen a place in his life where there weren't black ladies who worked in that cafeteria. You get to know them real well because sometimes you're going to be hungry. Maybe you're not going to have food. You'll be able to talk to them, and they'll give you some extra food or something like that at the end of the day. So I went to the cafeteria over there at ETSU. Got there. I'm going to go find these black ladies. I'm going to get to know them so we can do this. Oh, guess what? Not a black person. You talk about somebody. I thought I had done the wrong thing. There were no cell phones, so I had to go call him. I said, Dad, where have you sent me? There's nobody here, man. I go to the mall. There was nobody there. You didn't see anybody. And again, it's a different culture. I can understand very well how that could be disconcerting to somebody. When I was here in private practice, starting in the 90s, and the hospitals here in town would recruit physicians. If they had a physician who they were bringing here that was black, they always asked me to go and be part of the recruiting thing. Was that right, wrong, good, or bad? I don't know. But the reality is that somebody has to tell you what life is like in a culture, in an area where you may not see anybody that looks like you, because it can be very, very strange. And we think about it in that regard, but the reality is that what happens when you're picked up and you're put somewhere where you don't understand the language and nothing looks like you, sounds like you, smells like you, or anything of that nature? Believe me, you're going to be on edge. And that is what we have to realize that some people sometimes feel. I went to Vanderbilt, great university and everything of that nature. Had a great time while I was there, but there was a table there, and we called it the black table. Why? Because all the black people sat at this table. It made no sense, honestly, because we honestly segregated ourselves based on that. And then there were always little artsy guys, and they're just trying to show off and everything. They're over there sitting with the white people over there. See, we're going to sit here at the black table. Doesn't make sense. It's stupid. Fast forward now when I find all those classmates of mine who did that, all of us are working somewhere in society. All of us got degrees. All of us have good jobs. All of us are interacting with people of all shapes, sizes, colors, and everything of that nature. You learn that through exposure, and you learn that from having to deal with recognizing that that diversity happens, and you have to grow with that diversity. One of the interesting things about America versus Christianity, and that is one of the issues that we have, I think, in America, is that sometimes people equate the two as being the same, and they're not. But one of the things about America and our Constitution, our belief system, is that we have no choice, based on our American principles, but to lead to a country that is going to become very, very diverse. And based on that, and that is just what our country is based on. It is going to become diverse. We have to embrace loving each other in the face of that diversity, because that is just what it's going to be. Just like universities, just like anything. We're going to become a more diverse culture, and we have to feel comfortable around something that looks, smells, tastes, whatever, not like what we are.
So, I mean, I feel like we could definitely go on for longer, but we're kind of reaching that point. And first of all, I do want to say thank you for the last couple weeks. I've really appreciated it. I think y'all have, at least, yeah, you've appreciated it too. I'm not kicking them off. You can clap. But I did have one last question. Just we like to try to make it practical. You know, we have some actionable things that we can do. And so, I mean, I think that last point that you made is very important, which is this learning to interact with people who are different from you, and to because you know, our country and our society is only going to get more diverse, right? It's not going to happen. What do you think is, like, you know, from your experience, having to move so much, having to interact with people who are different from you, what is maybe like a piece of wisdom or advice that you have for all of us who maybe aren't as experienced interacting with people who are different from us? Like, how we can do that and create like a welcoming environment or a hospitable place or a loving kind of community for people who are different?
Yeah, basically in society, people want to live, people want to exist, people want to have families, they want to eat, drink, be protected, be warm when it's cold, be cool when it's hot, and kind of prosper and move forward. And that's the same all the world around. The best thing that you can do, that any of us can do when you're in a diverse situation, a diverse culture, is to realize that we really and truly are basically the same. We might look differently, we might sound differently, but we all want to live and we all want to survive. One of the things that you talked about when you're in the military is that what is it that two people in the military do when they're at war? Are they really concerned about the politics of it? Are they really concerned about my president doesn't like your president or anything like that? No. You want to get home safe so you can see your family, and you are going to get there by taking care of and fighting with your brother, the person who's beside you. That's the key as we deal with this, is to realize that we all will do well in life as we deal well with each other at arm's length. And the first thing you have to realize is in your heart that I plan and I choose not to let diversity change how I feel about people, because we're all sons and children of Christ. The second thing is to say, okay, let's get to know this person and their differences rather than just separate them and push them aside because of it. And what you'll realize is that there are more similarities than there are differences. With the military and everything, it was kind of funny because my mom and dad, they got married, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, they're heading off to Germany. And you would think that as a black couple in the 50s or so, I believe it was, when they traveled off to Germany, it would be tough. But mom and dad both always said that the things that they learned, that in the Army, in that setting, when you're in a group of people and the husbands typically were all getting sent off to fight or something like that, the women had to stick together. They had to work with each other. It didn't really matter what color you were or anything of that nature, because that was the only way you survived. And that was one of the things, that's part of the reason why I like the military so much. Nothing's perfect, but that's why I like it, because when the chips are down, when you're in that foxhole and you want to survive and get back, it doesn't matter what color that person is behind you or anything like that. As long as they aim straight, watch your back, you watch theirs, and you will both get back so you can see your families. And it's the same thing with those moms and wives who have families and their husbands are gone. They all stick together to work so they can get through it. And it's the same thing that we do in society. If we work together and everything, believe me, all we want to do is work hard, love one another, raise families, and be happy. And that really is the key. And converse, have those painful conversations, but realize that we have to do it in love and not judge or anything of that nature. So.
All right. Well, thanks, Robert,
Sure thing.
so
Yeah, no
much.
problem.